So I am very happy to be joined today by a group of panelists to talk about how we as CFIs can leverage Canada's research infrastructure to address global challenges. I've got with me today Dr. Scott Higgins, who's Senior Research Scientist with the IISD Experimental Lakes area. I've been asked not to give a huge bio and introduction to everyone and to encourage you instead to introduce yourselves and chat after the next meeting, whatever. But I will, in the theme of communications, just give the tagline to each of our institutions as I'm introducing us. So at the Experimental Lakes area, we're the world's freshwater laboratory. We're the only place in the world where it's possible to do experiments on whole lakes to understand the impacts that humans are having on freshwater systems. I've got Dr. John Pomeroy. He's the director of Global Water Future Observatories, which supports critical water research and data safeguarding Canadian water resources in an era of rapid change. Girma Bitsumalak, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, director of the Windy Research Facility at Western University. Windy enables climate resilient and sustainable communities through innovation in wind research and engineering. Dr. Kevin Kerr, who's research director at the Center for Biodiversity Genomics, the global leader in the development and application of DNA-based systems for species identification. And we are also meant to have Dr. Kate Moran, who's president and CEO of Oceans Networks Canada. They are a network of world-leading ocean observatories that bring data to the surface, accelerating scientific discovery and delivering solutions. Kate is stuck in a snowstorm, so was not able to make it, but she did send me a few comments on the question I wanted to direct to her, so I'll read those out when we get to that part of the session. So I'm actually... Let me take it out. I got it. I'm going to sit down because there's a chair for me, and I've been jealous of these chairs all day. So, John, I want to start with you. We're going to start with positioning Canada globally. And what I'm interested to hear a little bit more from you is how we as facilities can better position ourselves as essential global research infrastructure for addressing shared challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and water security.
Okay, thank you very much. The that global prominence, becoming global infrastructure that is essential for the world, results from having a long-term strategy. It requires research excellence, but also research relevance. We have to both be far-seeing enough to be answering the questions now that the world will be asking in 10 years and in 20 years. Because as you know, in science and research, results are not instantaneous. And so we have to be like they used to describe how Wayne Gretzky played hockey, know where the puck is going. And this means we need science that the world needs, and we have to be engaged with the world in both the development of those questions from global leaders and society, not just in Canada but elsewhere, but then also in finding the solutions for them. And so a big part of those is once you're strategic and on the right topics, you have to be very, very good. And you have to have the research that the world is coming for from around the world and seeking out these answers in Canada because of the prominence. And we certainly have that well represented at the CFI MSIs that are here. In our experience with Global Water Futures Observatories as a facility, remember we spun out of the Global Water Futures program, which became the largest freshwater research program in the world, and the most published and one of the most cited on the planet. So we had, from that previous decade of experience with GWF, we are able to position the GWFO facility as one of tremendous interest. And whether it's the questions of algae on the Great Lakes and the drinkability of Great Lakes water, or the Arctic and thaw of permafrost, or groundwater around Toronto and usability, or snow and ice in northern and western Canada, we're the place that people were already coming for answers, and we've maintained that through our facilities, which are world-class. So that excellence and relevance is key. The second one is networks. You can't do this alone. You can't be this in isolation. And so we found very successful experiences with global networks of similar facilities. We lead something called INARCH, the International Network of Alpine Research Catchment Hydrology. These are a series of mountain research catchments around the world in 39 countries. So in the Alps, in the Himalayas, in the Andes, in the U.S. Rockies, Scandinavia, Svalbard, Morocco, you name it, we're linked in there and we run it. And it links into GWFO. So there's an instant network of hundreds of researchers, and it's part of the World Climate Research Program. So it's very nicely tied in there. But that we also leverage INARCH in our own facilities for major programs. So we're talking to groups about European Union grants. We've just been awarded a major grant from Schmidt Sciences for the Virtual Institute for the Earth's Water, and our linkages with NOAA in the United States, which manages a lot of water and climate issues, has been very, very profound. So these are crucial things to have those science and those global networks there. The final thing is be writing the questions. And so that means something different. And so what we've done there is work with United Nations organizations, the UN General Assembly and its member states, with UNESCO, with the World Meteorological Organization, and the World Climate Research Program. And we've done this to develop things. We've been responsible for UN General Assembly resolutions calling for the sort of research that we do. One is on a glacier year, the other is newer. It's on a cryosphere decade. And then we have also positioned ourselves as one of 3 regional hydroclimate programs in the world, and the only one in North America. That's where we sit. Most recently, we've also provided the leadership for a international year on glaciers preservation, and now for the United Nations new decade of action for cryospheric sciences. And even the structural design of that decade is based upon the program structure of Global Water Futures Observatories. We feed data directly into the World Meteorological Organization and directly into other states. So we try to become essential there and provide those questions that are relevant to us and keep us relevant. And so it's nice when you hear for us with our great emphasis on snow and ice, you hear the UN Secretary General saying snow and ice is really important. It's critical for the survival of humanity. And we can tie that directly back to the influence. So the final thing is that the bilateral relationships that develop through those UN institutions is critically important, whether it's with France and Tajikistan on the cryosphere decade, or China, which has tremendous interest in this, and recently with the United States, but less now in the last year for reasons that you can assume. But it builds us other things, and it provides Canada a platform for leadership of countries with similar objectives on an area where we are a superpower. We are a freshwater superpower. We are a cryospheric, a snow and ice superpower by nature of our geography, and our facility and science need to reflect that and hence provide that leadership. So that's, I think there are many other examples through the MSIs that have done this or can do this as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much, John. I think there's a lot of themes there that we're going to hear over the course of the session: leadership, partnerships, leveraging our own unique abilities. We do have a couple of mentee polls that we'll do over the course of the session. I wonder, can you go to the first one? I'll get you as an audience to answer the question. What is the biggest opportunity for Canadian facilities to strengthen their global position? So yeah. Do you want me to read out those questions? Can you see them? You should be able to see them on your phone when you go to the poll. I'm going to go to the rest of the panelists and wonder if you have anything to add to John's comments on global positioning.
Sure.
Scott?
Yeah, maybe I'll say a few words. I quite agree with what John said. And for us, one of the big things is sort of recognizing what our strengths are and how they link into the interests and the needs and the wants at that level. So you mentioned this at the start, Pauline. For us, so our unique quality is the scale of research that we're able to do at the at the ecosystem level and knowing that this is really unique on a global stage. And I think all the MSIs have their unique qualities. So it's important to really know what those are and then leverage those to get into the room for these networks that you're talking about. Those are two things that have really helped us. So we're asked to the table because we're recognized as a global leader. And when we get there, we're respected and we are helping, set the stage for what those questions are.
Super interesting results, like quite split between leading international research consortia and improving global access to Canadian data and infrastructure, and then quite smaller on the other three. So that's super interesting. Okay, I'm going to go to my next question, which was, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Well, just to make one comment on what you just said there, I think the split is a little bit reflective of something Karen mentioned earlier today about this issue of trying to demonstrate basically these leading indicators rather than these lagging indicators. So I have a lot of passion. Think there's a lot of importance behind long-term monitoring, but if we're looking for future opportunities, it's going to be a long time before you see the payoff of any sort of investment like that. So I agree. It makes total sense that you're seeing a lot more support for the idea of investing in Canadian data, because that's something that's going to be much more active, sort of more immediate in its payoff, and maybe will contribute to some of those marginal impacts that we're looking for as well. So certainly when looking forward, the next opportunity, it makes total sense. But
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Scott?
Maybe I'll just add on that too. And so one of the things that's worked for us is we generate a lot of data, probably like all the other MSIs do. And we've been really making a conscious effort to lower the barriers to making our data accessible, others to use. And that's getting us into the room and into these networks. And it's been extremely helpful. And I was remembering that graph from yesterday saying of all the data that's used out of our MSIs, it's about 75% are from outside of the actual physical users of the facility. And so that seems to be like a really critical point.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question I had was actually directed to Kate. So I'll read the question, I'll read what she responded, and then I'll invite the rest of the panel to comment. So this is really about aligning funding mechanisms. How can Canadian facilities more effectively access, align, or leverage international funding programs while remaining responsive to domestic priorities and accountability requirements? All right, I can never do two things at once. Okay. The foundation of the answer to this question is based on building collaborations internationally. So this lines up with what we've just been talking about. There are many approaches for facilities to build collaborations. I'll share some of the ways that Oceans Networks Canada has built and leveraged international collaborations. ONC established an International Science Advisory Board to provide the organization with up-to-date knowledge on ocean-related activities in other countries and to advise on new ways to enhance our facility. 2 separate international collaborations have resulted in the dialogues we've had with the board. One member from the National Research Council of Spain proposed to work with ONC to establish a real-time coastal observatory in Antarctica, offshore Spain's Antarctic Station. 2 coastal observatories were jointly installed by ONC in Spain last month, and ONC is now operating and delivering real-time data for this region where very little ocean data are available. A second collaboration with the board resulted in a Canada-Norway proposal to install coastal observatories in the Arctic to Nordforsk, which is a funding organization under the Nordic Council of Ministers that supports international collaborations. A separate approach is simply to be open to new ways to enable new science to use your facility when the opportunity arises. This approach was invoked for many CFI facilities during COVID. For ONC, a team of high-energy particle physicists approached us to explore the concept of installing a neutrino detection array on ONC's Neptune Observatory in 2017. Since then, we've installed test systems that have documented that the deep sea site is ideal for detection, and this physics community has grown and been successful in funding to being built into funding for us in our network. Other approaches for international collaboration that can help to increase international research is help increase the use of international researchers' use of your facility. and access to funding resources, including programs to host visiting scientists. ONC is such a program, and through this program, many of the visiting scientists are international. The outcomes range from joint proposals to high-impact publications to new ideas for improvements of our facility. I would say we really experienced that as well. It's also important to participate in international programs when appropriate. The UN Decade of Ocean Science, much in line with what John was just talking about, for sustainable development is currently underway. ONC has been actively participating in the Decade programs with international partners, which has resulted in opportunities to be part of Horizon Europe competitions. And finally, organizing and hosting workshops also provides early seeds for new proposals and collaborations. Recent ONC workshops had broad international participation because of the interest in advancing urban coastal digital twins and climate mitigation solutions using ocean observations. I'm wondering your thoughts on her reflections.
Perhaps if I may add, usually international collaboration, at the center of those activities, it's human-to-human interaction. I think we need to be traveling a lot, like it could be conference or intentional travels, unless you establish those relationships, even by the time you don't have a relationship means by the time the call is out, you are already late, So that kind of intentional relationship building, how that could happen is organizing international conferences and particularly WINDE, we are active on infrastructure area and we are actively involved in international building current standard committees and things like that. And we travel, then through our impact and through our person-to-person contact, that's what translates into international collaboration. I can give one example, just even before Canada became an associate member of European Horizon, since we were present in many of European meetings, they encouraged us, your facility is unique. Why not we apply Horizon, making a case that Europe doesn't have this kind of facility, European researchers will benefit from it, Then, yes, let's try. Then we got it, Then we hosted the last 2.5 years, 13 different universities, more than 30 researchers came to WINDE, spend any time ranging from 2 weeks to 6 weeks doing their research, and that was a blast, just because we were there, so that kind of person-to-person communication, there's no magic, you cannot shortcut that one. So if Canada needs to be a center of international collaboration, we need to be where the action is and bring them to our facilities.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Does anybody else want to comment on any of these thoughts? John?
Yes, once we have been identified, the MSIs, as essential global infrastructure, then you're at the table for these international funding opportunities, whether it's through the European Union's Horizon program or large charities or other aspects. We've seen direct impacts on this in Global Water Futures observatories. We have more direct match funding from the United States government than we do from the government of Canada. That's another question. But anyway, the point being that even with all the cuts and the disturbances they've had in the United States, they're still providing support for the observatory because it's seen as essential, particularly for the management of the Great Lakes. And so those relationships are strong and they're robust and enduring.
Okay, Kevin, I'm going to go to you. I want to talk a little bit, I think this is appropriate after the last session, about data to impact. So how can facilities better track, demonstrate, and attribute their global impact beyond publications, although, they're obviously important, but how do we really demonstrate that we're influencing policy practice and real-world outcomes internationally?
Yeah, it's a good question. One that I thought I had formulated a pretty reasonable answer for before this meeting. And then yesterday, back in my hotel room, trying to digest not just a rich beef meal, but also the talk from the day of, I thought a lot about actually the presentation on the key indicators. And I thought, there really is a challenge here for organizations. I mean, the commonalities between us sometimes feel less than the differences. We're aligned by science, we're aligned by excellence, but we sit on this really broad continuum, and there's a lot of variation between these organizations. So trying to find a metric that's going to apply consistently across organizations is a huge challenge. And I think it'd be rather audacious of me to sit here and think I could just pitch ideas that are going to work when we just listen to, yesterday's sessions and realize the complexities it is of the people receiving these sort of metrics. So I will acknowledge off the bat, I think there is a little bit to be said for, not necessarily finding a one size fits all solution. And I think in line with that, I think some of the metrics that might sort of fit best for organizations sometimes are going to be those more qualitative in nature. We've heard a lot of discussion already about the importance of narratives and storytelling in dipping into not just the numbers behind our organizations, the number of users, the number of collaborators we have, but trying to really dive deep into those to look at the nature of those relationships. And just going back to the prior question for a moment, in Kate's written response about detailing the interactions they've had and the partnerships with these other groups that have resulted in co-funding. I think that's a similar example I wanted to use for our own organization as some of the demonstration of where we've succeeded. But I think we've been able to cement ourselves as a keystone institution because we are this unique player on a global program. And so when we look for evidence of this, I thought, for example, the CBG, if we look at some recent examples of international funding opportunities, we've mentioned Horizon Europe a couple times already at this meeting. There's 20 million euros that were granted to the Biodiversity Genome Europe program, which is meant to do something similar to what CBG does in advancing their records on biodiversity genomics and DNA barcoding, and we were an integral player in that program as well. So they rely on the facilities that we offer at our center, and they follow a program that was developed here in Canada. Similarly, the government of France is providing 45 million euros in support for a similar initiative in that country, trying to really integrate a lot of the different national scientific and naturalistic data they have on biodiversity. And again, it's going to include as a key ingredient DNA barcoding. Some of the recipients or major recipients of those funding as well are people that were trained initially at the CBG as well. And not just funding models, but even just high performing programs. So another example I like is a program that came out of Australia, Insect Investigators. We were just talking before lunch about the importance of science communication. This was a citizen science program in Australia that focused on getting youth primarily interested in the importance of insect biodiversity. And the backbone of this program relied on the facilities here in Guelph. So when they're describing their in-school programs, it mirrored a lot one we ran in Guelph. Actually, it was ran nationally, I should say, except when they had their samples ready for analysis, they were packaged up from the other side of the continent and sent to Canada in order to be processed because our facility was the most efficient and able and capable of producing high-quality data that was then going to be accessible for the group. So I think trying to find the stories where these MSI facilities are highlighted as being, again, these keystone centers is probably going to require more of these storytelling cases. And as well with this focus on data as well, I think one of the other challenges quite different is just honestly attribution. And perhaps we need to look more thoroughly into ways to support data attribution. I'm sure many of you, like ourselves, if you offer up data repositories, you have these policies in place about attribution. So we ask our users to be acknowledging us in their publications. And if you do that, I'm sure the challenge of enforcing that and the frustration when it doesn't happen. I know we're not alone because I've heard this from other groups, like Nature Survey is shared something similar. They have very explicit wording about how to acknowledge their organization, and it just oftentimes it doesn't happen. So trying to find ways to make that more thorough and consistent. And it's not just a matter of seeking credit necessarily, but just ways of illuminating the use of this data. And going back to my prior comment as well about leading and lagging indicators, that's one of those cases that we just want to show sometimes our data in action, and we need clear and transparent ways of showing when other organizations around the globe are relying on these products that we're developing. So yeah, I'd say. I know that captures my major points, I think, on the matter, but yeah.
Yeah, that's great. We're also curious to hear from you on this one. So can you go to the next Menti while I ask the rest of the panel? Do you have anything else to contribute to that, Scott?
Yeah. Maybe I'll say, so in our organization, influencing policy is in our strategic plan, right? So it's a goal of ours. There's the collecting of the data and the research, but our ultimate goal is to try to influence policy. And so we've looked at this, and I think the challenge is that it is not a straight road. And so just acknowledging that right from the get-go and saying that it's not going to be simple. There's not going to be any simple KPIs that track everything, and they're not always publicized. But this for us, this doesn't mean we don't try. This is really in our goals. And so maybe this isn't on the tracking part, but it's in how do you really do this? And one of the things that's worked for us is try to think of it as there's like a 2-track thing that's going on at the same time. One's the long-term one. And this is something that we have the advantage of in the MSIs is time, right? And so we can build the relationships with our stakeholders. We can build the relationships with policymakers, and we can build the trust there. And then when it comes to the projects, when we're developing the science that needs to get to policy, we're already in the rooms. This isn't something that needs to be developed in the short term. This is something that's already been done. So that's not on the KPI side, because but acknowledging the tracking is important, and probably means we're going to need a bunch of indicators that all of them are imperfect.
One of my biggest takeaways from the indicator session was like, I feel for all of you CFI folks that are trying to figure out indicators across all of us as institutions. It's not easy.
Just if I may add, from WIDI perspective, one of our impact assessment is how we impact building design and standards. Actually, I came here to Ottawa on Monday. For the first time, our group did a code provision for tornadic design as part of the National Building Code of Canada. This was a work that we have been doing for the last 2030. The ultimate goal is just to bring that knowledge so that every practitioner, designer will have that knowledge in the form of the standard. From the Canadian side, that's what we did. As we speak, the new code for the ASC is being updated by our group as well. Not only the direct impact of the research facilities, but a little earlier we're talking about merging the computing, the data, and everything. Can you imagine if the resiliency of our structure is only dependent on one unique facility, and you depend on that? It chokes the system. So learning from that, you have to develop physics models, computer models, data that will expand or transform the data. That's why we advocate, we need that computing. Otherwise, with this unique system, we are choking the system. How many problems are out there? We are not there to solve all the world, but the world problem. But the benchmark data, the knowledge we generate, either it will impact the code and standard that everybody has access, or the derivative outcome. For the first time in our practice, actually, let me go back. In any BCC, there is a single word that says you cannot use computational fluid dynamics for wind load evaluation. I don't like that statement, but I know what they are trying to do. Because we deal with turbulence, it is complex to model it, and we rely on these unique facilities. But because now we learned enough, we developed computer models that work, Now, as part of the AC and the National Stop Science, the NIST standard, we developed the first computational wind engineering pre-standard, which the wind researchers wrote the main chapters in that. That's how we need to be present all over the place and impact the industry through something that's accessible. I will add one more example, because the second point is adaptation of practice and government by industry. We are happy, like, for example, as MSI facility, we are helping, there's this long span bridge coming in Quebec City, like above 2 kilometers. I don't know if I'm in the liberty to tell how long it is. It's not my job to tell, but it's a very long, Many of the test facilities could not accommodate it. Then more than 28 experts, they spend more than a week in our facility testing more than 8-meter long suspension cable, and we help the industry also directly. So it is a multifaceted effort that will help us to improve the impact,
I think a key thing with this is what Kevin got to as well, is just attribution. So you can measure how many people are there using it, but particularly it's interesting that like the largest number there is long-term environmental or social outcomes. It's pretty hard to attribute those that as an indicator back to any one of us as individual facilities. And so figuring out a way to align or to get that attribution is something we think about a lot, and it's not easy. John?
So I just say it's hard, but it's happened. And I go back to the early history of the experimental lakes area, which provided the science that went behind the acid rain treaty with the United States in the late 1980s. And but the hard science from that came from places like ELA. And so it can have profound implications on our long-term outcomes.
And those stories are like, to also come back to using stories, those stories are really impactful, and people understand them right away. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. So this one's for Scott. So this is about infrastructure as a convening platform. So in what ways can large-scale research infrastructure serve not only as data-generated hubs, but also as neutral platforms for diplomacy, capacity building, and co-production of knowledge across borders?
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. That's a big question. I'm going to sort of start with the diplomacy side. So Corinne this morning was saying, we as MSI should be spending 10% of our time as ambassadors out raising awareness in the public and generating that public good for us. I think we should listen to him. That's diplomacy, not on the international scale. It's on the domestic scale. And I think there's been references to our Prime Minister's speech in Davos, I don't know how many times, here saying the importance of Canada as a middle power in diplomacy across the world. And I'm going to make an argument here, and I don't think probably people are going to disagree with this because who's in the room, but that science works really good for diplomacy because it's not called diplomacy. It's science, right? And I'm going to give some examples of this too. But when we think about this, and I was thinking across the MSIs that are here, there's probably no one size fits all. And I've seen a bunch of different models today, and there may be more. But the first one that I saw, and I thought this was really clear from Snow Lab and the Adamson, is that some of these facilities are multi-stakeholder facilities that attract international scientists from across the world. It happens, and there's this great diplomacy that happens there. So that's model number one. Model number two, and we've referred to this many times, is on the data side, is that 75% of our data users for across the facilities in general are being used not by the people who are actually at the facilities, but extending well beyond that. They're being used very, very broadly. So that's model number two. Model number three, John mentioned a minute ago, is that given the expertise that recognized expertise is embedding ourselves in these national networks and governance structures. And the last one that may not be recognized as well, but it's something we engage in and we see is really valuable, is the development and capacity building. And I'm going to illustrate that by a story. A little over a year ago, I was sitting in a small meeting room in Zambia as part of what was called the Lake Kivu Working Group. And this is a working group of scientists from the two riparian nations. It was DR Congo and Rwanda. And those countries were in open conflict at the time. And yet their scientists were there. And the countries saw the value in sending their scientists to these working groups, because these working groups were building the structures for how these two countries were going to share this really important shared resource that they have. And in many places in the world, this is in the water sector. Water is key to security, right? And so that's why they were there. We were there because, for two reasons. One, so I'm a scientist. I was in the room as a scientist to scientist. These were my colleagues. And my organization was there because we're supporting what was called the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education. And it's not just lifting up the Lake Kivu working group, but it's the working groups for all of the 7 Rift Valley lakes. There's 10 countries, about 120 scientists. And that is diplomacy at its finest. And I would say it's incredibly effective. And Canada looks really good when we engage in activities like that. And then lastly, and this is a bit on the development side, and because you were getting at capacity building too, but we made a decision several years ago, and Pauline was instrumental in this, in supporting what was called the African Women in Science program. And this program is supported by that A-Care group that I mentioned, and we're supporting A-Care and that program specifically. And the concern is that, women are underrepresented in the sciences in Africa, and especially in our field of freshwater research. And so this program was for early career African women scientists, and to get them embedded into their structures, their governance structures as scientists in their networks, and really promote that. So there's capacity building, there's coming over to Canada, visiting our station, introducing to networks here with academics. These are really valuable programs, and they're capacity building, but they also do a really important job or role in diplomacy.
Yeah, I mean, I could not agree more. Thanks, Scott. Others' thoughts on that?
Could I?
Yeah.
Yeah, our networks have been very useful in also perhaps promoting our values. One of the INARCH, one of the networks I talked about before, were mandated by CFI for open data and open science, as we should be, and we ascribe to that fully. So we mandated INARCH for open data and open science. So then we had to speak to the Russians and the Chinese about this, and we were able to get them to agree to publish their data openly in a special issue of a journal on a scientist-to-scientist basis. I'm not sure that that's the policy of their countries, but the scientists agreed to this and published massive data sets from the Caucasus and the Tibetan Plateau in that framework. So this is an area where that convening power can be very, very strong. Another one has been working in the Himalayas, particularly in Nepal, helping a group of setting up high altitude weather stations in Buddhist monasteries at high elevations. The problem in Nepal is always access and engagement with local communities. And the clever idea here was these monasteries are all in high, inaccessible places. Maybe the monks would like to look after a weather station. Well, it turns out they do. And so it's a great find because they get the weather data in which they want. And then it's also well looked after, and it ties into the community in a culturally appropriate way. So there's ways you can use these networks that are almost unimaginable 10 years ago.
Okay, my last question before I kind of open the floor is directed at Grandma. And so this is really about looking ahead. So, what strategic investments, policy shifts, or coordination mechanisms would most strengthen the collective international impact of Canada's research infrastructure ecosystem over the next decade? I gave you a big one.
Okay. I will start from the current, in my opinion, bottlenecks, and maybe that will shed some light, like, for example, CFI is a blessing to Canadian researchers, honestly. Like, without the CFI support, I don't know what kind of research we would do, Then drug on the other side, when it comes to digital research infrastructure, they are also a blessing. They just make us become expert, wash our hands through their technical support, and we become really conversant, experimentally computational. Where I see a bottleneck is the interconnectedness between the research infrastructure and the funding mechanism. Sometimes the two, they don't read each other. The example, the European Horizon example I mentioned earlier, is a beautiful example of how a funding agency reading the capability and the vibe in the research infrastructure, making resources available for early career researcher. That particular Horizon program was a research infrastructure grant, just 11 natural hazard laboratories. We went together and we opened our lab through a funding through the European Research Commission to whoever applied to that pot, that coordination. And it triggered so many collaboration from different countries I worked on projects that I never would work, like ship tornado and downburst loading on ship container. I'm a building a bridge guy, then that kind of collaboration. So when I bring it to a Canadian site, I wish NSERC or CIHR or SHERC give, I'm not asking, I know the tightness, like it could be some grants that will work around the MSI facilities, not for the MSI researchers, for researchers throughout Canada, then develop that culture of going to these facilities and utilizing them. I see Ronald from NSF standing there. There was in NSF, there is a national hazard research infrastructure program. They identified certain wind research facilities, earthquakes, tsunami as a national hub. And in the first iteration, it was solicited grant, researchers who want to use this, there is a grant available. Then many of the researchers apply and worked on that. After that, that grant was not there, but the culture of utilizing those facilities when they apply to whatever they are doing, then I can see as a person standing in Canada, observing how that community became dynamic, just we need that kind of catalyst by connecting the funding organization with research. Otherwise, what happens is I write a grant to NSERC, I get to do it, then I compete through research allocation in drug another research proposal to do the research that I already won. Then we burn the researcher. If drug communicates with NSERC or CFI, and we know that research is coming, why is that we don't make whatever resource available? Or in the evaluation, we could say, you cannot do this because you don't have competing access. Otherwise, we burn the researcher, So we really need to do a better job of like communicating, one another. And we have a beautiful country and we are not big. I think that coordination between funding and research infrastructure, honestly, in my opinion, that needs to be improved significantly. And the connection between another good example from NSF, at least in the past 10 years, is they have this connection between physical infrastructure and cyber physical. That's what they call it. In our case, we call it digital research infrastructure and CFI and things like that. Then that connection, and they created also a simulation center, a computing center. Not only that, there's a design safe where all the data collected from these facilities, it become like another research innovation hub, and many others, the data analyst, the computational modeler, they work on that, and you have another second, third life of the data generated, So I think learning from these two examples, we need to make that connection between funding agencies and the research infrastructure, be it CFI experimental or drug the computational.
So I have a final mentee on this one. Can you go to the next one? So what we're asking you is if you could prioritize one strategic investment over the next decade to strengthen Canada's MSI global impact, what would it be? Other comments from panelists while we're waiting for that to come up? Scott?
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I asked this question to AI to see what it would say, and it said we should invest more in AI. But it does make a good point, and I wonder if that should be part of if it's going to be part of the national data strategy or not. But the other thing it said, what I totally also agreed with, was that investing more in the core anchor facilities that link to these international collaborations and that too. So strengthen what we have, really identify those, and of course invest in AI. Those are
Something skipped from my mind earlier. Actually, in the example I mentioned from the European Horizon, the UK research was also a part. Something internationally what Canada do that could help our international presence is coordination. Like there was a call by NFRF International, that was beautiful, like it forced us to work internationally. That will create another playground for the future. So like similar to what I was commenting between NSERC, SHARC, and CFI drug, the European Horizon, or whoever we have, like our Prime Minister was traveling in many countries, whoever is willing to work with us, that kind of collaboration, then to encourage that, especially for early researchers, a mobility type of grant, to help them travel, move, connect, that will take us long way.
John?
Yes, I think we could get massive bang for the buck with a bit of help to host international secretariats to allow us to lead international partnerships. This is not formally part of our funding right now. Sometimes people do it off the sides of their desks, but if we had that as a formal stream, so Canadians can lead these organizations, and we have the support to do it properly. There's an immense gap internationally right now with the withdrawal of some countries from international organizations, and we could easily fill some of that gap where it's appropriate and strategic for us to do so.
I personally kind of reflecting on this question in the context of this workshop too. I think, of course, like no surprise looking there, long-term flexible funding. I mean, that is 100% what I expected the response would be from the group. But I think, there's been a couple of things that have been interesting about this workshop. There's been some really practical examples of shared learning that we can do across facilities. I'd never had so much kind of active discussion about asset management after that workshop. That was really great presentation and lots to learn from Snow Lab and what happened. The emphasis on science communication has been really good, and frankly has sort of emphasized the good work that we're doing at our facility, but there's always lots to learn. And then the other thing is, the push for a national data strategy from CFI and from all of us as institutions. I think that really helps us and helps us be bigger on the international stage. So those things, in addition to fundraising, are what makes it so valuable to be here, part of this group, from my perspective anyway.